Sharon saved her supply chain from cyber risk and ended the office goat debate.
Again, having trouble holding those gains today as we turn lower. A lot of it has to do with China. And on the back and forth that Alicia was talking about with China, let's bring Kit Conklin in. He's the Senior Vice President of Risk and Compliance for the supply chain AI firm Exiger. Welcome back. Kit, on the tablet, guys, we'll put it right up on the screen. This back and forth or the tit for tat with China since Trump came back into office. Left side of the screen, what the U.S. has done. 10% China responds, additional 10 China responds, 34 China comes back with 34. And this is what Alicia was talking about in her report. The additional 50 gets us up as of tomorrow to 104%. That's a big number, Kit. What do you make of it?
This is the Cuban Missile Crisis of trade wars. Clearly, we're not lobbing nuclear weapons at each other, but when it comes to trade actions, this is about as hot as it gets. And in the last 24 to 48 hours, it's been a retaliatory spiral between Beijing and Washington, with each side escalating on top of past escalations. So right now, markets, policymakers, the average consumer needs to be thinking about what are those off-ramps that enable Beijing and Washington to save face and de-escalate this situation.
So off-ramp was kind of the story of the day before the China news came out this afternoon, or the China confirmation came out this afternoon, because it was like, oh, well, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, is talking to all these countries, there's going to be deals quickly and that kind of thing. And then that kind of mindset has faded. I talked to Mark Zandi, the economist, on the show yesterday about some of this, and here's what he said. Listen.
The rest of the trading partners are important, but nothing's as important as our relationship with China. So it feels like, the odds are working in the wrong direction here.
Yeah,
and
Trump.
The other thing is, at some point, there's no return, right? I mean, even if you pause for 90 days, Connell, think about the uncertainty that creates for business people. And what are they going to do with that? They're not going to hire. They're not going to invest. They may start laying off. And once you will see layoffs, that's the line between no recession and recession.
What would you say about that, Kit? The idea that damage can be done in a short amount of time, and also the importance of China versus other countries?
If you look at U.S. exports globally, right, China is at the top. And so certainly industry verticals are going to be more affected than others, but it's a huge deal for agricultural producers in the United States, for manufacturing producers. It's going to bite. And so when it comes to recession risk, when it comes to whether the markets have priced in this escalation, I'm not sure that they have. And I think you're seeing some of that bounce back today as a reflection of that.
So the other thing, you mentioned exports on the screen now. We can pop it up from the tablet. We have the import side of it, which is the American consumer, because now these importers, the companies that, a lot of times people talk about this big number with, our phones and everything else, all the electronics, we know about that. But as you see there's all kinds of other items. Toys are a big one too, 30 billion plus there. So the companies here are basically going to have to pay double, right? So if something comes in from China, American companies starting tomorrow, unless something changes, double it, 104%. So what's the impact of that, and how long does it take us to feel that impact?
Quickly, right? The impact is going to be significant. And these are the obvious ones, right? These are direct shipments from China into the United States. I tell companies this all the time. If you don't have a map of your supply chain, you don't really know what your tariff exposure is, right? So it's easier for those companies that are directly importing from China to the United States to understand what that pain will be for consumers and for their customers. It's way more difficult when you start factoring in reciprocal tariffs globally. It affects far more industries than those that were just on the screen.
Or something more than reciprocal, which I think is what we're dealing with here. Any motivation on the Chinese side to make a deal, cut a deal? There should be, right? I mean, they're not set up the best in terms of their economy. Are they motivated to cut a deal?
The Chinese Communist Party views these tariffs as an existential threat, and they have to make a deal. There's no question about it. The question right now is, how do they do that in a way that saves face for them without looking weak to Trump? And so that's what the party is desperately trying to do right now. You had some of those overtures coming out from the White House this morning saying that they're willing to talk to Beijing. So I think that gives Beijing an opportunity to have that conversation. The bigger question right now for markets, from the American consumers, is how does China respond to those 104% tariffs. Do they implement additional tariffs? Do they implement state-sponsored boycotts against American products? Do they initiate additional export controls on things like critical minerals? How that response plays out overnight, I think, will drive what those off-ramps look like.
I wonder if there's a saving face component for President Trump as well. You know, that's always what they say about China, that it's so important culturally for their government, especially when they're in deals like this. But for, you know, what have you made, for example, the back and forth? I mentioned Besson earlier as kind of the one who probably gets markets the most, and people were thinking, well, all right, he's got more of a say. Maybe we're going to have a negotiation. But what about this back and forth? Sounds silly, but I don't know if it is, between Elon Musk and Peter Navarro. I mean, Navarro has been the champion of tariffs. He's the guy for this. And Musk comes out. I think we have Musk's tweet. We can put it up on the screen. He says, Navarro is a moron. So he's truly a moron. And what he says is demonstrably false, because he was alluding to something that Navarro had posted that basically implied that Teslas, you know, weren't all American made. When the data does show, and I think to back up Elon's point, that Tesla's probably the most American-made of all the cars we have. But anyway, what about this? And I wonder who Trump's listening to the most.
I think this is reflective of a broader policy conflict within the GOP right now on free trade from folks like Senator Paul, Senator Cruz coming out against some of these tariffs. So I think we're starting to see some of that pushback against the tariff agenda. Whether it shakes out, I think that's to be determined. But at the end of the day, the tariffs are in effect, right? So whether or not, things could have been different if the president had listened to other advisors is almost irrelevant at this point. What matters most right now is giving the White House and Beijing, in the sense of China anyway, a de-escalation point.
We'll see if we get one in the next couple of days or anything before tomorrow. Man. All right, Kit, thank you. Good analysis. Kit Conklin with us. This market rally, bounce back rally has faded. Meantime, moment.